All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this session of Finance Week, networking your way into investment banking. If this is your first session that you're joining, welcome. We hope that you have a great experience. Today is actually the first day of our IB intensive workshops. I'm really excited to have Samson here. Leland just dropped both the sign-up link for Leland as well as the Slack. Sign up is super important. So you get all of our free resources, you get the recordings. You have to be signed up for Leland to access the recordings. It's completely free to make an account. So make sure you do that. And then we will be using Slack for things like Q&A and all the other follow-up communication. So Dalen, thanks for dropping that in. Samson, if you want to head to the next slide, just a quick overview. Again, we had yesterday was an amazing day. Today we have 3 IB workshops. Dalen will also drop the Slack in where you can sign on for the other sessions. And then we'll keep you in the loop for tomorrow and Thursday. You have to actually individually sign up and enroll for each. So you get the Zoom links. We don't automatically send them all just because we want to make sure you want to be signed up. So go ahead and do that. And then Samson, if you don't mind hopping to the next slide, you should be all good. Already mentioned this, but we will be using Slack to communicate. I will be monitoring that alongside Dalen while Samson is doing his workshop. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in there and we'll make sure Samson gets them. And we'll also be doing some fun prompts and things to get everyone engaged. Next slide, please. Just a quick Leland overview. Again, I hope this isn't your first session, but if it is, on the next slide there, Samson, we can just do a quick run through of introductions and then we'll dive into what Leland is and who we are before we get started on the bulk of the content. Samson, if you want to go ahead and quickly introduce yourself, we'll do that and then we can get started.
Yeah. Thanks, Erica. Really excited to be here, everyone. I'm Samson. I'll be leading the session today. I interned at UBS in their M&A group in investment banking my junior summer, got a full-time return offer, and then re-recruited at a few other banks, got an offer from Jefferies and Deutsche Bank as well, and ended up starting my career at Jefferies in their investment banking division, and then have since gone on to work at a hedge fund for about a year, couple other roles, and currently at Disney, where I work in basically business development and strategy.
Awesome. And now we want to hear from each of you. So if you go ahead and join the Slack, Dalen will be dropping in our prompt in the finance channel. We have a lot to cover today, so drop your answer there. We'd love to hear from you. It's super important for us to get to know our users and our clients just so we can tailor everything to you. So go respond in the thread. Answer away. We'll get started just in the interest of time, but while we're going through things, make sure to answer and we'd love to hear from you. So on the next slide there, again, if this is your first session, Leland, we're the one-stop shop to help you reach your ambitious goals. If you are someone who wants to get into banking, which obviously I assume is why you're here, or other finance paths, MBA programs, other grad school programs, law school, med school, whatever it may be, we have coaching, group classes, and content to help you get there. And from there, on the next slide, we can just show you that we love helping people be successful. Obviously, we've had tons of wins hearing your stories. Our coaches are incredible. Our users are incredible. And we just want you to succeed in whatever field and industry you're trying to break into. So draft us to your team. We're here to help. And we love to see you be successful in whatever it is that you're trying to pursue. And with that, I will pass the mic over to you, Samson, for your workshop today.
Awesome. We have about 25 minutes, so I'll try and get through this as quickly as possible, but feel free to drop questions as we go in the Slack, and we'll do a couple minutes at the end for Q&A as well. So I'm going to cover 3 main topics here of kind of breaking into investment banking and specifically sort of the networking recruiting part of it. The first is crafting your story, second, preparing your resume, and then third, nailing the networking. In terms of crafting your story, I would argue that this is probably one of the most important parts of the entire recruiting process, and one that you need to kind of just nail in terms of working on your resume, your in-person interviews, your networking, whatever it might be, and one that also kind of will continue with you throughout your career. So I tell clients a lot of times in my coaching sessions to not underestimate kind of the story. And I think the way this helps you set you up for success is really by pinpointing, why you stand out and how you can excel at investment banks. So banks are really looking for three main things in their, summer analyst candidates. Um, the first is intellectual engagement. So obviously, like checking all the boxes of like good GPA, test scores, etc. I think we all are aware of that. But I think going beyond that of the intellectual engagement with, with the bank itself, with the finance world, with investment banking, as an industry, and actually being engaged with kind of some of the deals that are going on, some of the trends in the industry, anything like that. I think showing some of that intellectual capacity and engagement is really going to go a long way. The second big pillar here is being personable and articulate. I think we're all aware how like technically and analytically rigorous finance can be. And so often a lot of, prospective interns or analysts really over-index and focus on those technical skills, which is of course very important. But, while forgetting that at the end of the day, like being personable and likable is a really important part of the process. And ultimately, you're kind of there to actually, talk to senior bankers and make sure that they like you and kind of be a valuable asset on the team. And so focusing on kind of the behavioral questions, just presenting yourself, being presentable, and kind of acting the part, I think is a big part of the recruiting journey. And then the third piece is a positive attitude and being generally kind of a teachable person. So again, no one expects interns or analysts to come in kind of fully formed and perfectly trained. And I think having a really good mindset and being a fast learner is really another way to stand out and kind of the third pillar of what banks are looking for. And so in order to kind of highlight your assets and your attributes and how to really kind of like get your foot in the door with a bank is by crafting a compelling story. And again, as I mentioned, this is probably one of the most important parts of your recruiting process, and kind of starts all the way from your resume and your coffee chats through to your interviews, your time on the desk, and even your career beyond that. And so a couple of points I want to highlight here. The first is like the story should really be like cohesive and coherent, well thought out, well articulated, but also personal. And so there's a lot of generic kind of reasons that people want to go into banking. Uh, it's prestigious, it's high intensity, the work is very challenging. Like everyone knows that. That's nothing new. And so how can you actually kind of come to the table telling a bit of a personal story and articulating why you're there specifically and not just anyone in that seat would be interested in banking? So I think self-understanding is a big important part of that, and especially like making the story personal, thinking about like, hey, what do I really have to bring to the table? Why do I want to be here? Why does finance appeal to me? Maybe it's, your parents and your upbringing in a specific way that has made you really, really want to learn about the business world. Or maybe it's like a specific industry like healthcare that you've been exposed to in different ways, but want to kind of learn about the business side of through investment banking. Like there are a lot of great, reasons out there, but I can't give you that reason. It needs to be kind of personal and from the heart. So again, kind of the building blocks here on the right are first briefly kind of laying out sort of your background, a bit more of like the foundation of your interests, explaining why investment banking is like personally relevant to you and not just kind of those generic reasons that everyone chooses. And then launching into why you're there at that specific moment for that specific bank and why you're in front of your recruiter. I think oftentimes people talk about, I'm really interested in banking for XYZ reasons. Here's my background, but then don't actually take the next step. That could apply to anyone in any bank interview, but being like, why am I actually interested in Morgan Stanley LA office or something like that? And of course, adapting that story to every interview and networking call you have is going to be super important. I have two examples on the screen here of like a poor example of your quote story and then a strong example. These are like, again, examples, but I think helpful to articulate some of the points I was discussing. I'm not going to read everything word for word here, and we'll have a recording sent around after so you can kind of pause and actually read everything. But the key takeaways here are the strong example is really a personal story about, your specific situation, about your upbringing, and specifically like my parents, had a small business. I learned about it and was exposed to it as a kid growing up. That's really sparked my love for business and like my development and finance and And that's why I attended a certain university to study finance, and joined clubs and all this stuff. And kind of throughout all that experience, that's sort of how the penny dropped and how I was like, I'm really excited to, work in investment banking and hear all the reasons. And then actually taking, that story and making it specific to, again, in this example, you're interviewing with Lazard and saying, hey, this is why I'm excited about the prospect of working at Lazard, not just, again, any bank. And so I think the poor example or the kind of pitfall to avoid is being one, too generic. You want to have a story again that stands out without being like too overly ridiculous, over the top. I think the second point here is that the poor example really just doesn't kind of wow the interviewer, doesn't like bring any personal side to the table. And then the third thing I would mention is just like the strong example is still professional while being personal. So obviously, like you can go in too far of a direction of being really, over the top in terms of telling your whole life story. That's not what this is. This is a minute, maybe 2 minutes, a maximum you have at the start of an interview to be like, here's who I am in a brief spiel. Cool. So moving on to resume. As we all know, resume is obviously like kind of the cornerstone of you on one page. And of course, the role of a resume in IB recruiting is, has many hats. The first is, of course, in your initial outreach and coffee chats. I think many people think like my resume will only be used when I'm applying for interviews. That is not true. I think best practice from my perspective is to be always including your resume when you're doing any cold outreach to bankers, to classmates, anyone else. Again, it's sort of like your story about yourself on a page. And I think that is, essential to have that polished and in order as early as possible, not just when you're starting to apply to interviews. Of course, that resume will be key to getting you in the door and getting your interview invite for the first round. But then, of course, during the interviews, interviewers will always have, a printed out copy of your resume in front of them. They'll be kind of reading it through, highlighting certain things, making notes on the side. And, anything is fair game to talk about during your interview on your resume. And so, being aware of that and being, really prepared for anything that can come, I think is key. A couple of best practices here on the screen I wanted to highlight. Some of these are pretty obvious, typo free, of course, that's kind of basic. But I think a couple of things I wanted to focus on. The first is like showing action and impact. I think the biggest flaw I've seen in looking at, freshmen or sophomores in college, their resumes is really, it's not action oriented enough. It's always kind of focused on this is the task I did or was assigned. But taking that a next step further and saying, okay, what did I actually do and how did it impact the bank, the group I was in? What did this project result in? What did it drive? What, percent increase did it do? How did it contribute to the outcome of the deal? I think that is really the key. And so there's a common method in interviewing and resume writing called the STAR method, which is, situation, task, action, and then response. And so kind of like going through how it all resulted start to finish is key. The fourth point here, catering to investment banking is key. And so a lot of students, again, will have maybe a research assistant position or like a wealth management intern position. And you'll kind of just put exactly what it was. Helped a professor research economic trends. That is a pretty standard kind of like assistant research role you might have on campus. But reframing those titles to actually like think about the world of high finance and oriented towards investment banking or equity research or sales and trading, I think will be really important and is really impactful. So instead of saying I was a research assistant, saying I was like a, equity research analyst, on campus or an economic research analyst or something like that is really important. Quantify, of course, including metrics and numbers is really important. Again, that's another example I see of students just kind of voicing over what they did, sent out, pitch decks to investors, like put the number in, sent out over, pitch decks to over 100 investors resulting in XYZ. Like that's the exact same kind of bullet, but just reframed in such a stronger way. And then the final point here is including interests that show you are unique. I think, again, it's good to have a resume that is like has a standard template, is not too creative or off the wall, but like your, personal story and kind of like crafting your story about yourself, it's nice to have a resume that has some, unique things. For example, if you were, a varsity sports captain in high school, like that's always great to include. If you have any interesting kind of leadership or charitable kind of experiences, like that's very important to highlight on the resume. And of course, just like general interests, whether it's sports or music or art, whatever it might be, like highlighting those in small areas on the resume is always great, especially with senior bankers. They want to kind of get to know the person a little more, and not just kind of grill you on your internship experience. And so if you have some interesting things you've done that are great conversation starters, like of course include that. And then finally, the networking piece. I mean, again, all three of these pillars are super important, but networking is one that will start now and will continue for decades in your career, no matter what field you're in, no matter what you're doing. Networking with peers and like senior professionals is crucial to your success, and especially in finance, where it's such a people business. It's really a smaller world than you think, and often those relationships kind of, come back in different waves throughout your career. I'm almost 30. I did my internship at UBS like about 8 years ago now. And the other week I was at a friend's birthday party and ran into like a fellow intern from my UBS summer analyst class. We were like catching up. I haven't seen the guy in 8 years, but it's a small world out there. And so, that's really how a lot of these kind of business and deals get done at the higher level. So of course, networking is with your peers, your classmates and upperclassmen like at university, as well as just friends, fellow interns, whatever it might be, as well as professionals, full-time Wall Street professionals, from analysts all the way through to MD. I think, especially on the more senior side, people are a bit wary to reach out to, VPs, managing directors, knowing that they're super busy, they're super intimidating, whatever it might be. Some of my best connections and kind of, most helpful people in my career have been on the senior side. And so, don't be afraid to kind of take that leap. And I'll touch on that in a sec. Networking is a complex and unique type of experience, sort of rules of the game, if you will. It's a numbers game. It's truly, you send out 100 emails, you get 10 responses, you get 3 calls as a result of that, and you get 1 interview maybe. It's truly like a funnel in the same way that sales or many other kind of, relationship businesses are. And I think understanding that kind of goes in the second point of like, it's really just how the process works. And so not getting mad at that and actually just accepting that and not, being frustrated with a specific person for not responding or a specific bank for having a specific process, like just understand that that is how the game works. As I mentioned, it'll never stop. It's kind of a stalwart in your career. And I think a key part of it is really finding your edge. And so, of course, reaching out to like university alumni is often a great place that I recommend students start, to actually network with people. Usually if you're going to most universities, there are a lot of alums on Wall Street that are in investment banking that can kind of, pick up the phone and take your call. But finding your edge kind of comes in a couple of forms. The first is like finding unique pockets from your experience that, might actually be more valuable than just a generic. If you go to a large university with a strong finance program, there are going to be thousands of you, looking to network with hundreds of bankers on Wall Street. So how do you stand out? Maybe it's networking with, if you were a math major, it's networking with a fellow math major from your university. Or maybe it's networking with someone from outside of your university, like a different personal connection, maybe a summer camp or a former job or something like that. So kind of finding your edge in terms of finding people to chat with is going to be huge. The second piece of finding your edge I want to highlight is like understanding what fits you best for networking. I'm sure you guys are kind of going through some of those on-campus info session networking events where there are, Jefferies or Morgan Stanley or whomever will send a few senior bankers to campus. They'll do a quick talk. There'll be like a networking half hour where people stand around and it's like 8 students standing in a circle around one banker. I would never felt like I was good at that. I didn't think that that was ever really like productive for me. I never had any like really successful conversations, and you just don't get enough time with people. But I felt that, reaching out to connections, whether it's by cold email or, an introduction or kind of a friend of a friend, and having a one-on-one either conversation on the phone or even visiting them in the office or in a cafe like in New York, like that was always much more productive for me. And so that was kind of my edge of like, I don't need to worry too much about these on-campus events that become sort of a time suck for me because I might not be good at them, but I feel like I'm better at this other form of networking. So again, like networking comes in different shapes and sizes, and so understanding that and adapting is key. um Self-understanding, I've touched on this, being like knowing who you are, what your strengths and weaknesses are, what you're interested in, like that is huge. And then being genuinely interested, I think that's another one that I want to touch on quickly, is like people often just go through the motions. They're like, yeah, I know I need to network to get a job, and you're kind of going into the call being like, how can you get me a job, which is never the right attitude to come in with. If you're genuinely interested in someone's career and their experience, and you're like, oh wow, you spent 10 years at Morgan Stanley and then you moved to Deutsche Bank and you've been there a year. Like, tell me about that transition. Like, what was that like? Having a genuine interest in people go a long way, especially with more senior people. Um, I've kind of highlighted here some nitty gritty, points around networking, more advice. I'll kind of breeze through some of these, but a couple I wanted to focus on was like, again, attaching your resume. That's always key. Having a strong resume will get you a lot of places, and it's like a really easy way to get there. I would say be thankful and be flexible, especially when you're talking to VPs, MDs. Like, you never want to come across as, not grateful or entitled to their time. Facing your fears. I mentioned that like some of the more productive people in my career networking wise have been, senior bankers, VPs, MDs. So instead of avoiding those and being like, oh, analysts are easier, they're younger, they know the game more, push yourself and reach out to the key decision makers. Those are the ones that are actually kind of like can help you at the end of the day. And practice makes perfect. The first time you chat with an MD, you'll probably be very nervous, but after, your fifth or 10th, like it'll be very different. And then the final piece is like being collaborative, like friends and peers or older upperclassmen. Like, you should never think about them as competition. They're always kind of like on your side. You're all in the trenches together, and how can we kind of work together to really get ahead? And then a couple common mistakes to avoid that I wanted to touch on. I kind of mentioned this at the top, being generic, going through the motions, like that never works. Um, you don't want to try too hard. You don't want to try too little. I think I've seen a lot of times students be like, oh, like I need to come into a call with some like really interesting point about a deal or about, an industry trend or about their bank. Like, chances are if you're talking to someone senior on Wall Street, like you're not going to impress them with some like, market fact you've thought about. So, don't try too hard to impress them. But obviously, again, like don't just be like going through the motions and not trying at all. Like, you want to be genuinely there to hear what they're saying. Um, a small one that students always do is saying like, dear Mr. Blank or Miss Blank, you know, at when you're even a junior banker on Wall Street, being deferential is very important. There is a hierarchy, but no one really calls each other by that. So that's an easy way to kind of stand out in the bad way and be dinged maybe off the bat. Um, and then not following up. I mean, networking is like a long-term game. I think a lot of people say, oh, I'm going to reach out to like 10 people when it's time to interview, and hopefully they can get me an interview and then I'll be done. Like, again, some of the most fruitful and productive networking relationships I've had have been years long. You had a call, an informational like chat, when you're a sophomore in college, and you've kept in touch with them as you're an analyst and they're now at a private equity firm, and then they get you an interview, they get you a job. Like, following up and kind of keeping their relationship going is super, super important. Um, I'll pause there. That's kind of my spiel. We have a few minutes left for Q&A. If there are any questions, if anyone wants to come off mute, I'm happy to answer them now.
Hey there, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi. So you're talking, and it seems like most of this has kind of catered towards students who are already in college or currently in school. I just graduated this spring. Do you have any different advice, or would you kind of say a similar thing regarding networking and resume stuff going forward? if I'm still looking for a job or still looking kind of to break in at this point.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I think most of the points really remain. I think the nuance you might be experiencing as a post grad is just in terms of like process and structure, like it's much less structured and there's much less concrete timing on when interviews happen and when roles are available. But otherwise, like especially in a situation like that, like networking is going to be even more important. I know a lot of students that can kind of float through the process. If you're at a strong undergraduate finance program, you have a strong resume, you can kind of just like drop your resume in for the resume drops, get interviews, and go through the process that way without actually networking. But I think in your position, Ethan, like you'll need to be, hitting the pounding the pavement even further on networking and building those relationships because those are going to be the key ways where you'll get opportunities. And so yeah, I'd say a lot of that rings true and probably the networking piece even more so.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Hi, I had a question.
Yeah.
I'm a sophomore student at a non-target school,
Mhm.
and there are very few, like I don't have any upperclassmen who's like recruiting for IB in general. So there is no like classmates or upperclassmen that I can really have discussions with on this stuff. So and I'm also like trying to reach out to like non-target, like other non-target alums at
Yeah.
different firms, since my school doesn't have a lot of alums in the field. So what would be your advice in terms of like optimizing my time, as well as like right now I'm a sophomore, so I'll be recruiting for junior positions maybe in the next couple of months when like applications go out in January. So for this next less than 2 months or so, what would be your advice on in terms of optimizing my prep?
Yeah. That's a great call out. And I know that there are a lot of students that maybe at schools, yeah, that don't have many alumni on Wall Street and it's a bit tougher. So I think that kind of goes back to my point of like getting creative. If there are other ways that you can find, people to network with, that is of course going to be crucial because you don't have the benefit of like just the name brand of your university, let's say on your resume. So a couple that come to mind would be if you have a specific major that might be a little different than like finance and accounting. For example, I was a math major. I often bonded the closest with like other math majors who were in finance. And so if you're an engineer or if you're, a history major, finding people with that like similar studies, maybe from another similar background, like you said, like a non-target university, those can go a long way. Um, Another that comes to mind is sort of just, um, you know, I think there's nothing wrong with like the total cold outreach. Like you have nothing in common, but you kind of explain, hey, I'm like really excited about a specific bank, especially if you kind of refine your story and you were like, hey, I'm really interested in like this specific industry or this specific type of bank, and here's why. Like if you have a great cohesive story that people will react to, then I think that can go a long way as well. And so if you can find a way to tell that story in kind of a cold outreach email or LinkedIn message to bankers, if you're like, I'm so passionate about the healthcare space, both my parents worked in healthcare, I've been exposed to the world for a long time or to that industry for a long time, and being able to start my career in investment banking focused on healthcare, you know, would be like a dream job, and explaining all those things. If you reach out to healthcare bankers, they may, really connect with that story and might have been in the same shoes as you, even if they're not at the same university or didn't have the same, background or something. So, and then the third thing quickly I'll mention is like personal networks. Like we all know, people from random places. If there's anything you can think of, church groups, extracurricular clubs you've been in. I mentioned summer camp, like anything like that. I mean, that can go a long way. And even if it's, not someone who's in your dream role in investment banking, but in an adjacent area of a big bank, that can also lead to, that person connecting you with someone else. So yeah, I think using those second degree connections will be key for you as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much for sharing that. I was also wondering, as you mentioned, to mention the story on the LinkedIn outreach and stuff. So, I mean, the LinkedIn character limits are very low, right? So, I was I'm sending a lot of these connection requests with the connection notes, but hardly I can just describe that I go to this school, this major, interested in this, interested about your experience in this group at this firm, and would you be available for a brief chat for some advice? Like that's all. I really don't have like more space to add on the LinkedIn connection note. And for the emails, should I like still add this couple lines about my story?
Yeah, again, I think if you have a story that's personally relevant to someone you're reaching out to, you should definitely find a way to incorporate that, especially if you're feeling like I'm not getting, not getting responses. And yeah, I would always recommend reaching out over email. Like most banks' emails are templates, so you can just kind of figure it out. I'm sure you've done some of that. And that would be probably better than, yeah, the LinkedIn character limit box.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep.
Hi, Samson. I have a question.
Yes.
So mine's kind of the opposite. I am going to a target school, but my problem is I don't have a lot of experience in investment banking. Like the best I'm doing right now is, finding all these other groups, but for a resume, I have a for my LinkedIn, my resume, it's really, really weak in that field. What do you recommend I can do to strengthen my resume? Because I'm going to be a sophomore at my school and just got interested in this field.
Yeah. So if you have other finance experience, I personally didn't have any investment banking experience before I, landed my summer analyst role. And I know that other students, it's certainly, it's a nice to have, but it's definitely not a requirement. And if you're in adjacent areas like equity research or sales and trading or private equity or venture capital, like those are going to be analogous in certain ways to investment banking. So if you have experience like that, I would definitely try and highlight it. And as I mentioned, kind of like spin your experience into something, if you were at maybe a very small like VC fund, if you can try and, spin that into like, private investing, I think that's like a lot closer to investment banking than like a, cold calling in a VC role. So that would be kind of one recommendation. The other would be if you truly have like no finance experience, like getting that experience on campus, whether it's, in clubs, doing like case competitions, something like that, especially if you have a genuine interest in this stuff, like that'll actually be like interesting and exciting. The other thing I would say is like, again, being creative in networking and reaching out to like banks in your city where your school is or like banks or small, I use the term banks loosely here. Like it can be a very, very small kind of shop with a couple people that maybe does like sell side M&A only and might not even be like that analogous to what investment banking is at like a large bulge bracket bank. But if you can kind of have some of that experience, network with some of them, maybe do some part-time experience throughout the school year, like that will go a long way on the resume.
Okay, thank you.
I had another question. So I actually did a corporate banking internship last summer. Actually, like I mean, this summer, like summer 23, and I'm currently in my fall semester. I'm doing an boutique investment banking internship, and I don't have like yet anything lined up for the summer, for like next summer, like which is my sophomore summer. But I have an offer at Stifel in the ERM division, which is the enterprise risk management. Should I accept that offer and go ahead with that, or like should I decline that and look for some other boutique internships, keeping junior summer recruiting in mind?
Yeah, my advice here, which I'll keep brief, is really focusing on the role instead of the name brand. So obviously Stiefel is a name that people know, but risk management is not. It sounds like what you want to do, and you want to do more investment banking or other, fields that you have experience in. And so a no-name boutique investment banking experience, I would say, is always better than, Goldman Sachs risk management or something like that. So that would be my advice. And I also noticed, I think probably final question, Philip has their hand raised. I don't know if you had a question or.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, this might be a stupid question, but you've said that we shouldn't use their Mester or their Mrs. So what should we use instead? Should we just say the first name like hi John, or and the second question is that you said that we could spin our sort of, you know, if we work in a small VC fund, we should spin that into like a private investing experience. And I was just wanted to ask, like, could you elaborate on that? Like, specifically, what should we do in terms of like the bullet points we use or that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, on the second point, I'd be happy to kind of, it's something that's more probably easier to articulate in like a more formal like coaching process, or like looking at a resume and being like, here's one, one way to do it, and here's like a better way to spin some of those things. But yeah, I think overall it's like not necessarily like you want to always just frame your experience in a light that is keeping in mind investment banking and private equity and all those types of roles. And that may be hard if you haven't like had as much direct experience in those roles. But, you know, investment banking, M&A advisory, for example, is really like, building financial models, building PowerPoint presentations, pitch decks, and ultimately kind of being like a client advisor. So if you have experience that kind of falls into those buckets, you can try and push some of those, I guess, highlight some of those. And then on the first point, yeah, I would like, I'm speaking again, like from personal experience and from my client's experience in kind of the US, is like generally saying hi first name is more cordial, but still professional, and just, makes a lot of sense for most people. And I know we're about at time, or well over time here, so I think I'll pass the mic back to Erica.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Samson. And thank you for staying a few minutes longer than planned. Very generous with your time. Hope everyone had an amazing experience. Obviously, these workshops are all free. So our coaches are being super generous by, preparing these and hopping on to deliver this service for each of you. As a next step, go ahead and book time with Samson. He is open for one-on-one coaching. This is what he does on Leland. He has an offer here that's a code for 20% off your first session. So like many of your questions are answering or asked around like your personal situation, where you're at in the journey, that's what he can help you with. He can help you craft emails or your resume or outreach for LinkedIn, whatever it is that you're looking specific to your candidacy, he can help. And that's really where the value of that one-on-one coaching comes to play. So definitely book time with him. We dropped his link in the chat. We'll do so in the Slack community as well. And would just love for you to get that support you need. All of our coaches on Leland offer free 15-minute intro calls to learn more about their services. So if coaching is something you're considering, go ahead and schedule one with him. And Samson, on the last slide, just want to push everyone to attend the rest of the sessions today. We have 2 more, one on technical interview prep and one on behavioral. So really want you to not only get your foot in the door through networking, which is a huge part of the process, but then be able to nail your interviews once you land them. So we'll have those sessions. And with that, on the next slide, just a giant thank you. Thank you for being here, and look forward to seeing you at future sessions. Hope everyone has a lovely rest of the day. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.